Alabama Reckoner came from me making these portraits and me realizing, like, how can I express my gratefulness about being in Alabama, and also my gratefulness about having this community. And so I started thinking about the word reckoning. Like when I grew up, like, you know, in the Bible, they always talked about reckoning and stuff. And so when I was trying to figure out, like, what is this overall synthesis and structure that I'm going to apply, I realized, like, it is an Alabama Reckoner. Like, I'm trying to figure out, like, why I got so lucky to live in Alabama and meet these people. And so I hope people will notice that there is a structure that's in each piece that's repeated through the pieces, even though the pieces hopefully don't share that much. But at their core, it's about the people, but the people have stuff in common because I'm the one that's translating them, but also because they're my community. And so, like, I tried to figure out this structure, and it's like when I was saying, like, you know, that one slogan that I took from the Quran, actually, but I kind of used it. There are things in Alabama that you have never dreamed of. And so there were 12 portraits, and I didn't realize there's 12 words in that slogan. And so then I started to use that as like a reckoner structure. Like, how can I pose 12 images? How can I pose 12 other words that will become another type of more subjective poem about Alabama? And then it all just kind of worked out weirdly, at least to me. And that's just a weird thing I have, that when I make things, I don't want it to be siloed into one particular area. So, like, in a general sense, every individual portrait has forced me to confront a technical issue, because in my work, I want the technical issues to parallel the conceptual ideas very firmly, and also establish placemaking. So, like, when I chose which fibers to make, it was tied to how I felt about that person. Or when I chose which dye, or like in the dyes, I will add something to the dye to make it seep more, because I love in dyes like how it seeps into something the way our emotions seep into things. So you'll notice that sometimes the dye is actually very physical and concrete or lasting, and other times it's very intangible and emotional. I think a lot of artists talk about, like, being in the moment, and, like, I'm very tied into the craft of making. Like, I don't silo the difference between fine art and craft, because my work bridges both of those. But I will say I'm so into mindfulness that, of course, everything I do is related. Every time I collage a fragment together, I think of it as like chanting. And it has as much to do with, like, that type of prayer as with ideas of time. So, like, in my work, I tend to use materials that are both found and created, and it kind of goes along this line of how I want to create an intersection when the viewer comes to my work, which is poised between the idea of something being temporal and something being lasting. So a lot of times when I'm out scavenging for materials to make things from, like fiber for paper, or if I'm in a junk store and I'm looking for certain types of textures. So textures like rust, dust, torn fabric, it goes back to an overwhelming kind of desire in my work to mend things that are broken and to preserve things that other people don't think need to be preserved. So there's a balance in my work that I poise between the things that I'm actually physically creating and the things that I'm finding. And the strange thing for me is that I really think about finding things in locations as a creative act. So, like, that sense of organizing materials, that sense of finding things that are in my hierarchy of an aesthetic is incredibly crucial. So, like with Alabama Reckoner portraits, what I did was I took each person and It's somebody that I think is crucial in Alabama for various reasons. So what I'm doing is I basically would make drawings and list after list of things about that person, and then I would kind of free form associations with those persons, like this person has this type of intangible texture to them, so how am I going to create that intangible texture so that when the viewer comes up to the portrait, they're suspended in this kind of emotional landscape of the person. And I was really, really focused on trying to find, since there's 12 of them and they're all going to be in the museum, how do I find a unique quality between those different portraits? And so I looked at the person and tried to figure out what their agency was and what their power was.